Texas needs, and I talked about that, we need an educated population. The growth that's coming into Texas is coming in from other states because we have the corridor that's creating jobs. We have investors coming in from overseas, and that's the growth that we have. But we also have to build in our cities that can sustain that growth.
So what type of growth are you
Well,
wanting to kind of pinpoint coming out of Texas specifically?
Well, the growth it has to do with our educated population. We want more businesses to come in here and invest to create more jobs. But in order to create more jobs, we don't want to have to ship those jobs from overseas necessarily. We have to have an educated population that can fill those jobs. Right now, in our natural corridor, they're drilling oil. We just don't have sufficient petroleum engineers to sustain that growth. So we're having to ship them from outside of the United States to build that growth.
So a growth in oil and gas.
In oil and gas, we also need to be more creative. For example, with our young population, a lot of them are not going to go to a 4-year degree college, and we need to advise them and perhaps guide them that, you know what, we need vocational people. We need more pipe fitters. We need more linguists. We need other types of growth in the United States, in Texas, that can sustain the population coming here. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, education is a given.
Sure.
Right? And given by the stats that are already been given by the United States, we know that, you know, Texas has a very low growth rate within that, right? But if you're talking about creating growth within, you know, educational, what specific need of education do we need here in Texas? Do we need, I mean, I know we have A&M, which
Sure.
has the, you know, great programs within growth there. But I specifically work in film.
Sure.
Right? Film is not going either. I have to go to Canada, out of state, I mean out of the United States, or go to California, which is already going down. So,
But you know, we have Austin that creates a lot of movies now, and you know, supposedly they're building that up. Now that is something to propose. Perhaps New Mexico has a lot of credits that they give production companies who come in. That's a sustained growth that we can look at.
it is a sustained growth, but like Austin had their movies and their film community has left. They're not. That's where I came from.
Sure.
I was working there, and I'm originally from Houston, but I left to Austin to go work there. But being that film in general, we have a very, very low tax break. That's why projects aren't made here. They're made in neighboring states like New Mexico and Louisiana. So, like, I always look in media first.
Sure.
So the growth of communication is always best, right? But Texas has no film or media type of programs, like none of the colleges.
And you know, and that's something to sustain and suggest to a lot of the universities or the government. In Texas, you know, we have a shortage of doctors. Can you believe that in Texas? We have such a shortage of doctors because not enough people are attending medical school and are graduating. That's necessary because we have a growing population. We need doctors. We also need, you know, media, artists and such, because that's how we convey and communicate to each other. So we need to develop that for our communities and, of course, our states. So thank you for that question.
I have a question.
Sure.
This is probably the worst time to run for any political office right now. As you mentioned, America is pretty much cut up into pieces. There's a conservative, and there's the full government type. What made you decide to do it?
Because no one else will. I think when there is such a vacuum and people just have little, if any, hope, I think they're just hungry for a new, fresh, innovative voice that will guide them. And I think people are exhausted because they don't see leadership. So if we can have leadership that leads, not by the sideline, and not by the polls, and not by how many times they were voted the most conservative, but in actually implementing programs that are good for Texas, good for our economy here, I think if no one steps up, I will. question. You know, first, as I said, we need to defund Obamacare. We need to find an alternative, but that's not going to hurt our population because in Texas, we have great access to medical care. We already have programs set up here in Texas. We have CHIP, we have other things that help our senior citizens. And I know because I volunteer a lot with senior citizens and we guide them toward these programs. But we have to consider Obamacare coming into our state. Families, for example, of four, they're going to pay $1,200 to $1,500 in 1 year for their premium. In addition, the state will pay 10% for the first 3-4 years. After that, the state will pay 90 to 100% of it. Where exactly is that money going to come from? And that's going to eat up away a lot of the grants and monies available for our medical centers that we have here that are premium medical centers. So we really have to work on, the state will be solely responsible for paying for Obamacare. We need to find an alternative. Either we need to say, no, we will not accept Obamacare into Texas, but if we do, it's not free because we're all going to pay a portion of it. Where, we just haven't developed or really understood from where that money's going to come from. Yes, sir.
Linda, thank you very much for announcing that you're going to run. I was kind of concerned you might say no, that you're going to run, but I'm glad you decided to run. You touched on a couple of points that I'm very interested on.
Sure.
I share your points of view. You touched basically on economics and immigration. Immigration is actually my #1 subject. You touched on a lot of subjects, very important. But I am going to ask you about one subject that I didn't hear you touch on, and I would like to get your perspective on. I fear that we have a huge growing problem right now. We've had a war on drugs for a long time, and it doesn't seem like we're winning that war. And we have a war that is being fought south of the border, but it's being consumed here. How are we going to address this problem? When are we going to start addressing that?
You know, and that's a good question because we often talk about, when we talk about immigration, we go quickly to securing the border, which I think is important. We need to secure the border to secure the United States. But we also have to be careful because we have NAFTA and CAFTA that brings in 2 million jobs south of Texas, or in the south border here in the Rio Grande Valley and in Texas. We also have about $165 million that comes in from that trade. So we have to figure out exactly, are the drugs being trafficked through this corridor because of NAFTA? And so perhaps we can find one avenue strictly to bring in trade. And then if we really are serious about immigration reform, border security, let's stop everyone who comes into our country and ask them and look at their details. Let's not use that discretion or admission when they look at you and they ask you and they just wave you in. Who knows? Regardless of who you are, what you're driving, are you really here to traffic drugs or are you smuggling something in? So let's be consistent in that so that we can find a solution. And we know that Houston is the hub for trafficking, either human trafficking or drugs. So we need to better concentrate in this area to figure out, is their consumption so high that we invite it? Or are we just relaxed at the border that, you know, makes people seem that the United States is more viable and they can enter? So we have to be careful in that. Any other questions?
Sorry.
No, that's
Pretty
okay.
late. So, are you running, right? Are you
Yes.
running? Okay.
I am.
Because I just got the press release and you are going to announce if you are running. Tell
Okay.
us more about it. You are kind of moderate Republican. How you are going to deal with the Tea Party or the most conservative?
On particular issues or on my platform? My platform is strictly economic. Economic viability for Texas. How is it that we can ensure that the prosperity we have in Texas is not going to go by the wayside because people can't agree in Washington, we shut down the government, we don't have programs that are going to focus on job creativity or bringing in investors from overseas to create jobs. So we have to be really practical about finding solutions that are good for America, not just centered only on one party or some person's idea. Let's look at it as a whole. And I hope that people look at my platform and realize it's about economics and it's about the genuineness and caring of America to create that prosperity.
Thank you. ¿Me puede decir en español por qué usted ha decidido buscar la candidatura para el Senado de Estados Unidos?
Probablemente no, pero sí, quiero que tengan toda la oportunidad aquí en Texas como yo tuve. Tenemos muchos jóvenes, tenemos muchas personas que viven en Texas que buscan la oportunidad, pero piensan que no la tienen. O piensan que el Partido Republicano es contra mujeres, contra latinos, contra esto. Pero debemos de ver de lo que nos ha dado el gobierno aquí en Texas para los que quieran salir adelante, que quieran ser empresarios, que quieran estudiar, que quieran participar aquí en Texas. Y por eso les quiero dar la voz, no nomás para decir el Partido Republicano no está para nosotros, está contra nosotros. Y pienso que mis ideas van a ser similar, si no, con varias personas, familias.